A very warm good afternoon to one and all. I, Miss Manali Momaya, take immense pleasure to welcome you all to this very first webinar organized by Akshara Foundation, Dharwad. Today, on the occasion of the 187th birth anniversary of Robert Bruce Foote, an unparalleled scholar whose contributions to our knowledge of Indian archaeology and geology are invaluable, we have come forth with this much needed webinar focusing on his numerous gifts to our academic knowledge. On the onset, I request Dr. Jagdish Ashode to welcome everyone and to give a brief introductory note on Akshara Foundation.
Sound muted. Good afternoon, everyone. ಎಲ್ರಿಗೂ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನದ ನಮಸ್ಕಾರಗಳು. ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ದಿಂದ ತಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ನಾನು ಇಲ್ಲಿಗೆ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕ ಮತ್ತು ನಂಗೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಭಾಷಣ ಮಾಡಲಿಕೊಟ್ಟ ತಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ವಂದಿಸ್ತಾ ನನ್ನ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಮೊದಲನೇದಾಗಿ ನನ್ನ ಎಲ್ಲ ಗುರು ಬಾಂಧವರಿಗೆ ಹಾಗೂ ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರೀತಿಯ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿನಿಯರಿಗೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಅದರಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಮೋದ್ ಬಿ ಗಾಯಿ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಹಾಗೂ ನನ್ನ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕವಾಗಿ
Jagdish,
Sir, I think there is some problem. There is some problem with the audio, sir. Just give us a minute.
ಕೆಲವು ನೆಟ್ವರ್ಕ್ ಪ್ರಾಬ್ಲಮ್ದಿಂದ ಸರಿಯಾಗಿ ಲೈನ್ ಸಿಗ್ತಾ ಇಲ್ಲ. ಎಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಮಧ್ಯಾಹ್ನದ ಶುಭ ವಂದನೆಗಳು. ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕ ಮಾತನಾಡಲು ನಿಮಗೆ ಅವಕಾಶ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟ ತಮ್ಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಧನ್ಯವಾದಗಳನ್ನ ಅರ್ಪಿಸ್ತೀನಿ. ನನಗೆ ಮಾಡಲು ಕೂಡ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತದೆ. ಯಾಕಂದ್ರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಗುರು ಹಿರಿಯರ ನಮ್ಮ ಪರಿಚಯ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕ ಮಾತನಾಡಲು ತುಂಬಾ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆ ಅನಿಸುತ್ತವೆ. ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಅತಿಥಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಆಗಮಿಸಿದಂತ ಪ್ರಮೋದ್ ಬಿ ಗಾಯಿ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಹಾಗೂ ನನ್ನ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರುತ್ತೀನಿ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶಿವರುದ್ರ ಕಲೋಳ್ಕರ್ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ವತಿಯಿಂದ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರುತ್ತೀನಿ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ರಿಸೋರ್ಸ್ ಪರ್ಸನ್ ಆಗಿ ನಮಗೆ ಅನುವು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ರವಿ ಕೋರಿಶೆಟ್ಟರ್ ಸರ್ ಅವರಿಗೂ ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಹಾಗೂ ನನ್ನ ವೈಯಕ್ತಿಕವಾಗಿ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರುತ್ತೇನೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಕರ್ನಾಟಕ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯದ ಇತಿಹಾಸ ಮತ್ತು ಪ್ರಾಶಾಸ್ತ್ರ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಪ್ರಾಧ್ಯಾಪಕರಾದಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶಿಲಾಧರ ಮುಗುಳಿ ಸರ್, ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ LP ಮಾರುತಿ ಸರ್ ಹಾಗೂ ಇತರೆ ವಿಭಾಗದ ಅಧ್ಯಾಪಕರುಗಳಾದಂತ ಎಲ್ಲ ನನ್ನ ಗುರು ಬಾಂಧವರಿಗೆ ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೀನಿ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಬೇರೆ ಬೇರೆ ವಿಶ್ವವಿದ್ಯಾಲಯಗಳಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಆಗಮಿಸಿದಂತ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳು, ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳು ಹಾಗೂ PG ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳು ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತೀನಿ. ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕವಾಗಿ ನಾನು ಒಂದೆರಡು ಮಾತುಗಳನ್ನು ಹೇಳಲು ಇಷ್ಟಪಡ್ತೀನಿ. ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕವಾಗಿ ಹೇಳುವುದಾದರೆ, ನಮ್ಮದು ಒಂದು ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನಾವು 2020ರಲ್ಲಿ ಪ್ರಾರಂಭ ಮಾಡಿದ್ವಿ. ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಮೂಲ ಕಾರಣೀಕರ್ತರಾದಂತ ಪ್ರೊಫೆಸರ್ ಶಿವರುದ್ರ ಕಲೋಳ್ಕರ್ ಸರ್ ಅವರು. ಇದರಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಒಂದು ಹೊಸ ಅಧ್ಯಾಯ ರೂಪ ಮಾಡಲು ನಮಗೆ ಒಂದು ಅನುವು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಟ್ಟಿದ್ದು ನಾವು ಇಲ್ಲಿ ನೆನೆಸ್ಕೊಳ್ಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಇದರಿಂದ ನಮಗೆ ಒಂದು ಉತ್ತಮವಾದ ಶಿಕ್ಷಣ ವ್ಯವಸ್ಥೆಯನ್ನು ಜನರ ಮನಗಳಿಗೆ ಮುಟ್ಟುವಂತೆ ನಾವು ಮಾಡುವುದೇ ನಮ್ಮದೇ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಉದ್ದೇಶವಾಗಿದೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಹೊಸ ರೀತಿಯ ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ಲೇಖನಗಳು ಕೂಡ ನಾವು ಈ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ಗಳಿಂದ ನಾವು ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂತ ನಮ್ಮ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಉದ್ದೇಶವಾಗಿದೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಹೊಸ ವಿಚಾರಗಳನ್ನು ನಾವು ಈ ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ರೀತಿಯಲ್ಲಿ ಆಗಿರ್ಬೋದು, ಪ್ರಚಲಿತವಾದಂತ ವಿದ್ಯಮಾನಗಳ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಾವು ಈ ಒಂದು ವೇದಿಕೆಯನ್ನು ಮಾಡಿಕೊಂಡು ನಾವು ಈ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಅನ್ನು ಮುನ್ನಡೆಸಲು ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರಮುಖವಾಗಿ ಇದನ್ನ ನಾವು ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವೆ. ಆದ್ದರಿಂದ ಈ ಸಂಶೋಧನಾ ವಿದ್ಯಾರ್ಥಿಗಳಿಗೆ ಈ ಪ್ರಬಂಧ ಲೇಖನಗಳನ್ನು ಯಾವ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಮತ್ತು ಹೇಗೆ ನಾವು ಪ್ರಚಲಿತ ಘಟನೆಗಳಿಗೆ ಅವುಗಳನ್ನ ಹೊಂದಾಣಿಕೆ ಮಾಡ್ಕೋಬೇಕು ಅನ್ನೋದನ್ನ ನಾವಿಲ್ಲಿ ಮುಖ್ಯವಾಗಿ ನಮ್ಮ ಉದ್ದೇಶವನ್ನು ಹೊಂದಿದ್ದೇವೆ. ಅದೇ ರೀತಿಯಾಗಿ ಈ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮಕ್ಕೆ ನಮಗೆ ರಾಬರ್ಟ್ ಬ್ರೂಸ್ಫುಟ್ ಅವರ ಒಂದು ಜನ್ಮದಿನ ನಮಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಅಮೂಲ್ಯವಾದ ದಿನವಾಗಿದೆ. ಅವರ ಜನ್ಮದಿನದಿಂದ ನಾವು ಈ ಪ್ರಥಮ ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮವನ್ನು ಹಮ್ಮಿಕೊಂಡಿದ್ದು ನಮಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಸಂತೋಷಕರವಾದ ಸಂಗತಿಯಾಗಿದೆ. ಏಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ನಮ್ಮ ದೇಶಕ್ಕೆ ಪ್ರಪ್ರಥಮವಾಗಿ ಈ ಆರ್ಕಿಯಾಲಜಿಕಲ್ ಸೈಟ್ಸ್ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ನಮಗೆ ಹಾಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಪೂರ್ವಜರ ಇತಿಹಾಸವನ್ನು ನಮಗೆ ಪ್ರಪ್ರಥಮವಾಗಿ ತೋರಿಸಿಕೊಂಡಂತ ಅವರಿಗೂ ನಾವು ಒಂದು ಋಣಿಯಾಗಿರ್ಬೇಕೆಂಬುದು ನಂದು ಮುಖ್ಯ ಉದ್ದೇಶವಾಗಿದೆ. ಯಾಕೆಂದ್ರೆ ಅವರು ಮಾಡಿರ್ತಕ್ಕಂಥ ಕೆಲಸಗಳು ನಮಗೆ ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಆರ್ಕಿಯಾಲಜಿಕಲ್ ಆಫ್ ಇಂಡಿಯಾ ನಾವು ಏನ್ ನೋಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೇವಲ್ಲ, ಇದಕ್ಕೆ ಕಾರಣಕರ್ತರೇ ರಾಬರ್ಟ್ ಬ್ರೂಸ್ಫುಟ್ ಅವರು. ಹೀಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಈ ಪ್ರಾಚೀನ ಕಾಲದಿಂದ ಹಿಡಿದು ಇವತ್ತಿನವರೆಗೂ ನಮಗೆ ಹೊಸ ಸಂಶೋಧನೆಗಳು ನಮಗೆ ಅಧ್ಯಯನ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಡಲು ನಮಗೆ ಆರ್ಕಿಯಾಲಜಿಕಲ್ ಸೈಟ್ಸ್ಗಳು ಹಾಗೂ ಆರ್ಕಿಯಾಲಜಿಕಲ್ ಅಧ್ಯಯನಗಳು ನಮಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಅವಶ್ಯಕವಾಗಿದೆ ಎಂಬುದು ನಮ್ಮ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ಮುಖ್ಯ ಉದ್ದೇಶವಾಗಿದೆ ಎಂದು ನಾವು ಈ ಒಂದು ಕಾರ್ಯಕ್ರಮ ಮಾಡಿಕೊಳ್ಳಲು ನಮಗೆ ಅತ್ಯಂತ ಹೆಮ್ಮೆಯ ವಿಷಯವಾಗಿದೆ ಎಂಬುದು ನನ್ನ ಅಭಿಪ್ರಾಯವಾಗಿದೆ. ಹೀಗೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಅಕ್ಷರ ಫೌಂಡೇಶನ್ ವತಿಯಿಂದ ತಮಗೆಲ್ಲರಿಗೂ ಇನ್ನೊಮ್ಮೆ ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಮತ್ತು ಸುಸ್ವಾಗತವನ್ನು ಕೋರ್ತಾ ನನ್ನ ಪ್ರಾಸ್ತಾವಿಕ ಮತ್ತು ಸ್ವಾಗತ ಭಾಷೆಯನ್ನು ವಿರಾಮ ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ. ನಮಸ್ಕಾರ.
I thank Dr. Jagdish Asode for this very brief introduction of Akshara Foundation. I now request Dr. Aditya Hegde to introduce our today's chief guest, Dr. Pramod V. Ghai sir, and also our guest of honor, Dr. S.K. Kalolikar sir.
Good afternoon, everybody. First and foremost, I'm going to give brief introduction of our chief guest, Professor Ghai sir. Professor Pramod B. Ghai graduated with honors from Karnataka Science College, Dharwad. He obtained his master degree in anthropology from Karnataka University, Dharwad in 1975. His was the first PhD with specialization in human genetics from Karnataka University, Dharwad, entitled Genetics of Musculus Palmaris Lungs. Professor Ghai has 38 years of teaching experience for postgraduate students. He has guided many PhD and postgraduate projects and published more than 45 research articles in national and international publications. For the first time in Karnataka, Professor Ghai has established a research center for DNA diagnostics. Looking at the progress of the institution, government was converted it into an autonomous institute under the purview of Department of Higher Education, Government of Karnataka, and is renamed as Karnataka Institute of DNA Research. And Professor Ghai debuted as its founder director. Along with this, he also received funding from Vision Group of Science and Technology, Department of Science and Technology, University Grant Commission, Indian Council for Medical Research, etc. for national and international projects as principal investigator. He served as Vice Chancellor for Karnataka University, Dharwad from 2015 to 2019. Professor Ghai also served as member of Research Advisory Committee and Research and Recognition Committee of many universities, academic council member and syndicate member of Karnataka University, Dharwad. Currently, he is director of Karnataka Institute for DNA Research. Now, I would like to introduce our guest of honor, Professor S.K. Kalolikar sir. Shivrudra Kalolikar hailed from Yarabatti, small village from Rayabag Taluk of Belgaum district, and was born in 1959. He completed his primary education at his native place Yabaratti and secondary education from HV High School, Harugeri, and ID High School, Chikkodi. His college education was carried out in GS Science and Rani Parvati Devi College at Belgaum and post-graduation from the Department of History and Archaeology, Karnataka University, Dharwad. He did his PhD on Upliftment of Untouchables, Approaches of Sri Basaveshwar and Dr. B.R. Ambedkar, a comparative study. From 2002 to 2011, he served as the director of the Karnataka University Postgraduate Center, Bijapur. He has so far produced 14 MPhils and 13 PhDs, and at present, 8 students are pursuing their PhDs. From 1992 to 2002, he taught in the Department of Ambedkar Studies, and from 2002 to 2011, he has taught the PG Diploma in Tourism and Art History, apart from History and Archaeology in Mother Department. He has attended 36 national and international conferences and presented papers. To his credit, 24 papers are published in reputed journals and books. He has delivered 7 radio talks and nearly 100 of public speeches. Professor S.K. Kalulkar is a prolific writer. He, as a chief editor, has edited 6 books and edited 2 books as an editor. Apart from this, he is a novelist and he has authored 9 books. Considering his significant service rendered for the poor and depressed class students and to the field of education, Government of Karnataka has conferred Karnataka Rajyotsava Award in 2010. Also been the recipient of the 2 national awards. Once again, on the behalf of Akshara Foundation and all our viewers, I welcome you all once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Aditya Hegde, for introducing our chief guest and guest of honor. It is now time to introduce our resource person for this webinar, and I request Dr. Madhuri Chaugule to introduce Dr. Ravi Korishettar, sir.
I would like to introduce our beloved teacher and today's resource person, Professor Ravi Korishettar. He was born on 8 July 1952. He completed his post-graduation in archaeology and his PhD from Pune University, Maharashtra. His areas of specialization are archaeology, art, architecture, museum, and heritage studies. He is a multifaceted personality who also has certificate in quaternary research in geology from INQ QUA, Beijing, and in computer application from Deccan College, Pune. With specialization in database management in archaeology, his PhD title was Prehistory and Geomorphology of the Middle Krishna Basin, Karnataka. His postdoctoral research pursuits include a multidisciplinary paleoclimate project on Kashmir funded by DST. From Physical Research Laboratory, Ahmedabad, ICHR funded project on geoarchaeology of Middle Krishna Basin from Deccan College, Pune, and a project on computer application in archaeology funded by Ford Foundation. He was twice shortlisted for the post of Doctor General of ASI. Has published seminal research papers in high impact factor journals, published 2 books abroad and 8 in India, and was section editor in Current Science, India Science Fortnightly Journal. He has guided 12 PhD scholars in their doctoral studies. Sir has served the university in various administrative capacities and worked relevantly for the welfare of his students. He believes in innovative and novel methods of teaching. He is a member of numerous academic and administrative bodies and has edited journals. Man and Environmental, published by ISPQUS Pune, Journal of Karnataka University, Social Sciences, Quaternary, International and Current Science. He has secured fellowship of various reputed universities and institutions, both abroad in India. Sir has delivered number of scholarly lecture at various national and international institutions. He has presented 38 papers in international, 51 papers in national seminars and conferences. He has completed 18 major research projects on various aspects of history and archaeology, published over 120 research articles in reputed journals, and has several other inspiring academic feats to his credit. Sir is a senior academic fellow at Indian Council of Historical Research, New Delhi, and honorary director of Robert Bruce Foote Sangankallu Archaeological Museum, Ballari. It is a great honor to have this opportunity to introduce such inspiring scholars today. Once again, on behalf of all members of Akshara Foundation and all our viewers, and welcome you all. Thank you.
I thank Dr. Madhuri Choble for introducing our resource person. I now request our chief guest of this webinar, Professor Pramod Ghai sir, to address the audience.
Good afternoon to all of you. Am I audible? Can you hear me? Respected Professor Ravi Korishettar, Professor Kallodikar, other faculty members of the Department of History and Archaeology and other departments, and all the participants who have logged in for this webinar. I am extremely happy to participate in this webinar organized by the Akshara Foundation. At the outset, I would like to thank Dr. Jagdish Asude, Professor Kallodikar, and their team of Akshara Foundation for inviting me to this webinar and giving me an opportunity to participate in this webinar. This webinar, which has been organized today, aptly on the birthday of Robert Bruce Foote, is highly relevant to all the students of history and archaeology, and also those who are interested in the study of Indian prehistory. This webinar, after we listen to the resource person, I am sure will create awareness and introduce to the beginners about one of the greatest figures of Indian prehistory, Robert Bruce Foote, who is considered as father of Indian prehistory, and will also kindle interest, at least in some of them, to embrace a career in Indian archaeology like today's guest professor. If this is done, the objective of the webinar is achieved. And aptly today, the Akshara Foundation has organized this webinar on the birthday of Robert Bruce Foote. Today we have with us a renowned archaeologist, a serious researcher, my friend Dr. Ravi Korishettar, who is incidentally the honorary director of Robert Bruce Foote Sangankallu Archaeological Museum at Ballari. He will be speaking on the contribution of Robert Bruce Foote to Indian prehistory, and I am sure his lecture will be extremely interesting to the students of history and archaeology, and to also other listeners who are interested in knowing about the history of our country. If we glance at the historical development of the field of archaeology and even anthropology in India, we find, especially during the earlier phase, that is in the second half of 19th century, several British archaeologists and anthropologists having contributed extensively and conducted fieldwork and excavations throughout the length and breadth of the country. and contributed immensely to the field of Indian archaeology. A few among them are, for example, Alexander Cunningham, who is the founder and first Director General of Archaeological Survey of India way back in 1861. Then we have, after him, James Burgess, John Marshall, and many others. Another important personality, British archaeologist, was Sir Mortimer Wheeler, whose contribution to the archaeology of Indus Valley civilization by his excavations in Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal, etc. were remarkable. Similarly, there were many Indian scholars, archaeologists, who were Director Generals of Archaeological Survey of India and contributed significantly to the development of Indian archaeology. For example, we had M.N. Dixit, N.P. Chakravarti, B.B. Lal, M.N. Deshpande, M.S. Nagaraj Rao, and many others. So thus, Indian archaeology is an ocean for those who take it as a passion. If you take it as a passion like Professor Ravi Korishettar, definitely you will shine in this field of Indian archaeology, prehistory, prehistoric archaeology, Paleolithic, Mesolithic, Neolithic, Iron Age, etc. And I am sure today's lecture will enlighten all of us. I am also interested because I have learned some archaeology, prehistoric archaeology, as a student of anthropology from one Professor Rami Reddy. So I have an interest, being an anthropologist, being a geneticist, a lot of work is being done in the field of genetic archaeology or archaeogenetics. So thus, today's lecture, I am sure, will kindle interest in many of the students in Indian archaeology and Indian prehistory. I once again congratulate the team of Akshara Foundation for their maiden effort, because this is the first webinar that they are conducting, and in the days to come, they will extend their academic activities in many other fields, not only in archaeology, but other fields as well, and shine in the future. Thank you very much.
I thank Professor Pramod Ghai sir for his encouraging and inspiring words. Thank you very much, sir, and we assure you that we will definitely follow in the footsteps of our great professors like you and Professor Korishettar sir. It is now time for the main part of the event, and I request our beloved resource person, Professor Korishettar sir, to take over the webinar. Sir, you are on mute.
Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
We can hear you.
Dr. Pramod Ghai, I'm greatly honored by your presence, and also my colleagues who are also participating from near and far. And I'm particularly happy that I was considered to be part of this event today. And I, at the outset, must also say in a word of thanks to Akshara Foundation, and I admire their efforts and their choice of the opening ceremony of the series of events that are being planned by the Akshara Foundation. I wish them all the best, and I'm sure I will be, party to activities that will be taking place under the auspices of the, Akshara Foundation and so on. With these brief remarks, I would like to share my screen. Can you see?
Sir, the screen is not showing.
Okay, let me, yeah. Now? Is it showing?
No.
No?
No.
Yes, sir. The screen is visible now. It is
Now
visible,
is it?
sir.
Oh, there is a lag, I think.
Ah.
Can you see now?
Yes.
Yes, sir. We can see it.
Okay. I can't see myself anyway, but I'm happy that you can see me as well as my PowerPoint presentation. As you can
Yes.
see here, the topic assigned to me was Robert Brucewood's contribution to archaeological studies in Karnataka. I generally don't consider these modern geographical, subdivisions of the Indian subcontinent when it comes to discussing the way in which biocultural evolution of human society took place in the Indian subcontinent. However, for the purpose of defining, the prehistoric developments in select areas, the terms like Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, and all are applicable, I believe. And as you can see here, I'm not just saying that we are celebrating 187th birthday of Robert Brucewood, but otherwise, it is celebrating Robert Brucewood because in the context of Robert Brucewood's contribution to Indian prehistory, there are so many events. There are so many events which deserve celebration. And then of course, his birth anniversary, his first entry into the Karnataka region, and then his discovery of Pallavaram in 1863, and then his identification. He brings an end to the era of pre-identification archaeology in the Indian subcontinent. And of course, as you can see, it is also the the identification of a series of sites which have now received highest attention from modern day archaeologists, and revisiting some of the sites which were discovered by Robert Brucewood has been very, very productive. More than that, retracing Robert Brucewood's footsteps have been even more rewarding to many. And you can also see two sites on this particular slide here. One is this particular landscape, which is known as Sanganekalo granite, Tor Inselberg landscape. And this was one site which was first identified by Robert Brucewood as a distinctive Neolithic site associated with a hilltop plateau. Another one is this particular mound, which is popularly known as ash mound. This ash mound is nothing but deliberately accumulated cattle dung, which was set on fire from time to time and so on, as a result of very high temperatures attained at the time of burning. The layers have become harder and harder. We call it vitrification. This vitrification is takes place because of fusion of silica in the natural soil, in the cow dung, hot cow dung, and so on, and that leads to formation of rock-like structure. And this is the reason why these new mounds have survived till today for well over 4,000 to 5,000 years and so on. And he was again here the first person to bring an end to what we call conjectures and refutations. This is an era where we were not sure what these features are in terms of their presence on the landscape. But early explorers were definitely confident about that they have documented some feature which is not natural. They have documented some feature which is unusual, which is unique to this particular landscape and so on. And that is where food also played a very important role in identifying their archaeological significance and so on. So these two sites were discovered by Robert Brucewood in 1870. That was the time he entered the Karnataka province. But prior to that, he had established a reputation for discovering the oldest Paleolithic settlement in India, and that happened to be near Madras by name Pallavaram, which has now been encroached by the modern city of Chennai. But otherwise, part of this landscape is still being preserved, as a heritage point there in the Madras city. But otherwise, after his discovery of the earliest Paleolithic artifact at Pallavaram, he went about different parts of northern Tamil Nadu along with his colleague William King, and discovered many more sites and so on. And by then, he had established a reputation of being an archaeologist, prehistorian, and then of course he was professional geologist and so on. So he's coming to Bellary marks the beginning of prehistoric archaeology in India. But early days of his entry into Karnataka did not focus on the Paleolithic period. And as I mentioned, these two sites and many more which he encountered during the course of his geological tours happen to be either Neolithic or ash mound sites, or sometimes even megalithic monuments, burial complexes of the Iron Age, and so on and so forth. So who was this Robert Brucewood? So there was an occasion in 2012. As I mentioned, another important event that we celebrate annually is a death anniversary. Geologists make it a point to celebrate his death anniversary, and that occasion was the centenary of his death anniversary. So it was 2012. The Geological Survey of India invited me to talk on his contribution to prehistory of the Indian subcontinent. And during the course of the deliberations, many geologists were referring to him as father of South Indian geology. And then I was waiting for my turn, and when I got my mic, I started telling you that we have a greater claim on Robert Brucewood. You call him father of South Indian geology, and we archaeologists call him father of Indian prehistory. So naturally we have we all belong to the Foot lineage, no doubt, but then we have a greater claim and so on. And the whole audience was in laughter. And then we discussed in great detail the way in which he contributed to development of geological and prehistoric studies, especially in peninsular South India and so on. So in order to find a typical description of Robert Brucewood, this particular statement should make a lot of sense to all of you. And we will gradually understand as we go through this session all these aspects of Robert Brucewood's personality. He was a geologist, he was an archaeologist, he was an ethnographer, he was a paleontologist, he was a museologist, and an artist. As a geologist, we all will know gradually. As an archaeologist, we will know. And what we mean by ethnographer is one simple example I will give you. When he identified these ash mounds in the Bellary region, he was trying to find a clear explanation to the processes behind the formation of these ash mounds. And so he was looking for parallels, amongst tribal communities, among pastoral groups in India and outside and so on. And in Eastern Africa, there's a particular community which used to practice burning of cow dung. And then this tradition used to be referred to as Jeriba. Jeriba means a thorny enclosure, basically. And in this enclosure, you have the huts, you have these cow dung, and you have several other activities performed by the pastoral community. And then you also found that these people were accumulating cow dung and also setting it on fire. So he took that as an example. So ethnoarchaeology, look at the practices among the living primitive societies and see if there is any comparability that helps in extrapolating present knowledge to the past practices and so on and so forth. And that is where he qualifies himself as an ethnoarchaeologist or an ethnographer, and the first, perhaps the oldest ethnographer that we know of in the Indian subcontinent. Paleontology refers to the study of animal fossils which are preserved in alluvial deposits and also in other geological formations. And so paleontologists are those people who study the way in which animal kingdom has evolved based on morphological study of human animal fossils that are preserved in the geological formations. So museologists, because at the end of his nearly 5 decades of investigations in different parts of India, he had collected large number of antiquities. And these antiquities were not to be left behind in the backyard of his house, but he made it a point to prepare a catalog of each of these, antiquity that he had collected from a number of sites, nearly 450 sites or so. And then he sold them to Madras Government Museum in 1894 or somewhere. And that collection was sold for a staggering amount of 35,000 rupees. Imagine now if 35,000 rupees, and the value today will be several crores and so on. And so, and then I call him a museologist because he did not simply dump them in the museum for money. He prepared a systematic catalog, and the catalogs were also published, but published posthumously, and they became the source of all future archaeologists in India and so on. an artist, he's a gifted artist, and he was a landscape artist, and he has produced numerous artworks which are included in many of his publications, including the sketches of geological formations that he used to map across different parts of southern India and so on. So it is not easy task to define Robert Brucefoot's contributions in the world of 19th century scholarship. He was very much ahead of his times and so on. But in a simple expression, we can simply say this: he was the man who shaped the future of Indian prehistory and brought an end to an era of pre-identification. When I say pre-identification, prior to the coming of Robert Brucefoot, we had several of these antiquarians, civil servants, and also those people who served the British Army, regiments in different parts of British India. And they were, antiquarians, and they were also adventurous. And they would not sit in their offices and while away time, but then they will move into interior parts of the region and then try to discover the region, know the region as. So incidentally, they were also coming forward with their discoveries, and then they were not keeping that information with them. They were disseminating it, sharing them with their colleagues, and also publishing, brief notes, descriptions, and so on and so forth. And that is why, for example, what we mean by pre-identification in the context of this particular ash mound at Kudathini, the one I showed you in the beginning, was discovered by Colonel Mackenzie, who happened to be the first Surveyor General of India. But prior to becoming the Surveyor General, he was going around he was traversing across major parts of southern India, and he was always in the company of our Andhra antiquarians. They were known as Kavali brothers, and Kavali Lachmaya was one very close associate with him. And in the company of Lachmaya, sorry, I forget his name. Mackenzie was the first person to discover the ash mound in 1802, 1803. And he was not aware. But what was important here? What is important here is that he was very, very sure that it is not a natural formation. So he identified, and not only that particular ash mound at Kudathini, but several others in the neighborhood of Bellary, as well as in Chingalput district. Now it has been renamed and so on in Tamil Nadu. He discovered this in the 4 to 5 similar ash mounds, but they were not sure what they are. And then Lachmaya later happened to write to one Thomas Newbold, who was serving in the British regiment, Madras regiment in Madras, and he was posted at Kurnool as assistant collector. And those were the days when deputy commissioners were called as collectors and so on. So when he was posted in Kurnool, he was trained geologist, he was an antiquarian, and also a sort of an eccentric guy. He would always look for something which is not easily visible. And so he will probe into the landscapes and then try to identify something unusual, unique, and so on and so forth. So he was the one who discovered these famous caves at Bilasargam and so on, which were later excavated by Robert Brucefoot. But prior to this, when Lachmaya wrote to Newbold about this particular mound, he rushed to the spot, and he was traversing from Kurnool to Bijapur to Bellary and those areas, and identifying certain unique landform features and so on. And when he landed in Kudathini, he was sure that he should do something more than what earlier people who visited this mound had done. And so he took samples, sent it to Royal Asiatic Society in Kolkata, and came out with some kind of findings. And then they reported James Prinsep, the name you must be very, very familiar to you. And then after the analysis was done at the Kolkata Museum, they identified this as a scoria, volcanic scoria. So again, it is a natural phenomenon. It's volcanic activity giving rise to that kind of hard, crusty, material and so on. But then it did not stop there. He also went around Bellary and discovered the ash mounds at the base of the famous Sanganakallu site. At that point of time, this site was known as Kuppagam. So in 1830s, he came out with preliminary findings, and then subsequently he was even more serious. He sent some samples from these ash mounds and sent it to England, and got some analysis done. But of course, prior to the coming of Robert Brucefoot, this particular mound was subject to visits by many of these antiquarians, administrators, civil service, and so on. And there are many people, as I said, volcanic scoria, it is a volcanic limestone slag, it is a travertine, is a lake deposit, and then it is a place where mass cremations were taking place. It is a place where battle between Sugriva Valley took place, and the mass cremation was taking place. And then you have the area identified as the glass manufacturing. Glass means beads. As I said, high temperatures only you can melt silica, and then you extract glass, an artificial glass. So that is the kind of glass manufacturing activity from which beads and bangles and such things were made. And then they also said it is also metallurgical slag, extraction of iron and so on and so forth. And also copper is one of the most popular resources that occurs in these geological formations in the region of this particular ash mound and so on. Little later, even after 100 years of this kind of interpretations or conjectures about the formation of the ash mound, some scholars tended to believe in the fact that they are places where metallurgical activity was conducted and so on. So, but when Foote's coming into this region in 1970 was a turning point, and his preliminary observations at Kudathini and also at Sanganakallu and so on were very clearly defining that these are all Neolithic sites. These ash mounds are also part and parcel of Neolithic pastoral communities, and then certain practices, like I told, for example, Jeriba and so on and so forth. And Foote also went to the extent of identifying plant impressions in this particular ash mound deposits and so on. But then, of course, we are now very sure, because at such high temperatures, any vegetal matter cannot be preserved in terms of in the form of impressions and so on. But then he was so curious, he penetrating observations he was making, and then he also took samples and got them analyzed in England and so on. But he was sure it is. From then onwards, we came to know that this is a cattle dung set on fire up to 800 to 1200 degrees centigrade, and vitrification has given rise to the formation of distinctive mounds which stand above the ground and so on. So with this brief introduction, we would like to introduce you to some of the milestones in the life and career of Robert Bruce Foote. As you all know, he was born on 22nd September 1934 to William Henry Foote and Sophia Wells Percival. This was a scholarly, intellectual family. They had connections with Sri Lanka. They had a lot of interest in Tamil, a lot of interest in Sanskrit and so on. Foote had inherited some of these aspects from his ancestors as well. And he came to India in 1858. And again, it was a month of September 28th, he joined the Geological Survey of British India. Initially, he was posted in Calcutta, but later he was transferred to Madras. And that was the time when British Geological Survey was, initiating systematic mapping of geological resources across India, mineral, metal, and other precious stones and so on and so forth. And then once he was there, within 3 years from the date of his joining, he was the person to identify the first paleolith found anywhere in India in the vicinity of Madras at Pallavaram and so on. And then subsequently, he was elected Fellow of the Geological Society of London because he was constantly in interaction with these people. And his discoveries that he was making from time to time were also sent to the Royal Asiatic Society, discourses and debates that were going on. He was, prior to coming to India, he was also exposed to the debates that were taking place at the Royal Society in London. And he had an intuitive feeling that India should be the place where one can locate origins of mankind as well as origins of civilization and so on. So that intuitive, feeling in him always, gave him an inspiration or motivation to look for wherever he went for preparing geological documents. He was looking for these remains, and so he chanced upon the site of Pallavaram and so on. He was fellow of the Madras University and also member of the Madras Engineering faculty in 1984, and then he was corresponding fellow of the Geological Society of Edinburgh. He held the following positions in the Geological Survey. He first joined as assistant geologist, and then he was promoted as first grade officer, then 1881 deputy superintendent geologist, a superintending geologist and officiating director. He did not attain the position of full-time director. In 1892, he retired from the Geological Survey of India. But subsequently, he was invited by the Maharaja of the Baroda Principality, Gaikwad, to start a department. And so he served there for 2 years, from 1892 to 1894. And during this period, he surveyed the rivers Mahi, Sabarmati, Orsang, and so on. And here again, he was the first person to identify the presence of Paleolithic sites. And and then subsequently he came to he was invited by the Maharaja of Mysore to start a department of geology again, and then which is now known as Mysore Geological Department, and now it is celebrating 125 years. And so here he was the first founder director, and during the course of this he retraversed across various gold fields in southern Karnataka and also northern Karnataka and identified their potential. In addition to that, he ventured into the what we call Malnad borderlands, such as the upper reaches of the Tungabhadra rivers, and there also he found one site at a place called Lingadhalli on the upper Bhadra area of this Tungabhadra river. And this site, although it was discovered in 1896 while he was working for the Mysore Geological Department, had remained in isolation. And in the last 20-30 years, many more sites have been discovered in the neighborhood of Lingadhalli and so on. That is where we say retracing Robert Brucefoot's footsteps have been very, very rewarding. And then he was married twice and he had 9 children. His first child, Henry Foote, was also serving the British Army, but he was part-time archaeologist as well. He accompanied him in many excavations, and particularly the excavations at Bilazargam. He was the right hand for Robert Brucefoot. His first wife, Elizabeth, came from an illustrious family. Again, a lot of interest in study of Indian culture and so on. And the last child, Eliza, was born in Daroji. There is a British bungalow, which I will show you gradually. And after the birth of this Eliza, his first wife passed away. They had to rush back to Chennai. In 1870 was the time when they came, and his residence was is today still on the banks of this Daroji tank, very close to the Kudithini ash mound. His second wife was Melissa Wells, came from his maternal side. She lived with him till the end and gave birth to 5 children. And so he had in all 9 children. His proximity to Reverend Percival, his first father-in-law, strengthened his early interest in Indian culture and history and further nurtured it with a missionary zeal, because the way he did not leave a single stone unturned during the course of his service in the British Geological Survey, and even beyond that while he was in Gaikwad province, and also while he was serving the Mysore Maharaja in southern Karnataka and so on. And then and the number of discoveries he made is stupendous and very, very important for all of us to know that they laid the foundations of Indian priesthood, particularly southern Indian priesthood and so on. He was a naturalized Indian. He was well versed in Tamil. He was well versed in Telugu and also knew Kannada and so on. And this language facility always helped them venture into interior places, although they were generally accompanied by local people. But interaction with the local people were much more beneficial. And if he did not know the language, he would not be able to do that. And that is where his language skills helped him a lot in conducting detailed field work in interior parts. Even when I was doing field work in the 1970s, there were no roads to reach many of the sites which were discovered by Robert Brucefoot, more than 100 years ago and so on. And since he died in Kolkata at age of 78, and his ashes were brought to Yerkad in Kodaikanal area, and then there is a monument built for him. So he's the one who has left a legacy like no other, colonial servant working in India in different capacities and so on. So that is where there are many firsts to his credit. He discovered the first Paleolithic tool at Pallavaram on 30 May 1863, first to adopt the 3A system. That is where he gave a structure to Indian prehistory. His finds into Paleolithic, Neolithic, Iron Age. So he knew typology, he knew technology of these artifacts, and so he was able to classify them and order them in a chronological framework and so on. And by that time, this 3-age framework was already popular all over the world, especially in Europe. And so he had inherited European methodology, and so he identified his collection of artifacts into 3 groups belonging to Paleolithic, Neolithic, and Iron Age and so on. So if you look at his Madras Government Museum publications, catalog of antiquities, this particular scheme has been utilized by him very, very effectively. He was the first to study the Sanganakallu Neolithic site, the first to discover the early Stone Age sites in and around Ballari, Chitradurga region in the present Karnataka, And also in the Kaladgi region, you see modern whether Bijapur, Belgaum, Bagalkot, and further northwards into Gulbarga region, Kalaburgi, Yadgir, and Bidar, and so on. And then he has the first to tie up ash mounds with the Neolithic cultures. That is where he brought an end to area of speculation. Conjectures and refutations came to an end, and they came to be definitely identified as ash mounds and so on. And the first to recognize the archaeological potential of terraces. These are coastal dunes, sand dunes. And on the surface of these sand dunes, he also found microlithic stone artifacts. And then he suggested that the detailed studies need to be carried out, because he himself was not engaging in prehistoric research, but he was making a very systematic and descriptive documents of what he used to find in terms of archaeological features across the landscape and so on. So first to integrate Neolithic habitation sites and ash mounds. So they used to be looked at as independent entities, but then he said, yes, they go together. And then as I will show you a map where we have distribution of ash mounds and also their juxtaposition with the Neolithic sites and so on. The first to explore Sabarmati and Mahi rivers in Gujarat. He was the first to excavate Vilasargam limestone caves. And then he was the first to map gold-bearing rocks in South India across different parts of South India. The first structural geologist. So a peninsular, what they call Precambrian geologists are beholden to him, because the maps he prepared are very, very immaculate, to the level of inches and millimeters. That is what I hear from many geologists who are working in the mining areas. They say, we carry Foote's maps, we don't need anybody else's maps, and so they are so accurate and so on. So that is the way he was working with this 19th century tools for documentation and so on. And he founded the departments of mines and geology in Gaikwad, that is Baroda, as well as in Mysore, which later got shifted to Dharwad. So this particular publication, although he discovered the first Paleolith at Pallavaram in 1863, in the beginning he was not very sure. He was reticent, and then he was sharing his discoveries with his colleagues and so on. But as I said, when he started finding similar things, in northern parts of Tamil Nadu, especially in the North Arcot district and Chinglapet districts those days, he came across similar, artifacts, and then he and King came out with a definite, understanding of these pieces of stones as antiquities, artifacts and Paleolithic artifacts and so on. And so he came out with this particular publication in 1866 that was published in the Madras Journal of Literature and Science, and this heralded the dawn of Indian prehistoric literature and scientific documentation of Paleolithic and Neolithic sites and so on. So this made him, gain confidence in whatever, documentation he was making during the course of his geological tours across different parts of peninsular South India. Between 1863 and 1892, while he was in the GSI, discovered as many as 459 prehistoric sites in various parts. Among them, 42 were Old Stone Age or Paleolithic sites, 250 were Neolithic sites, and the rest belonged to the Megalithic or Iron Age and so on. Major part of his collection is housed in Madras Government Museum, as I mentioned to you, and he prepared catalogs, and these are the catalogs, which is source book of Indian prehistory now. And each one of us who have been working in different parts of, archaeology, 3 or 4 generations of archaeologists since the time of Robert Brucefoot have been guided by these publications. And if you go into the details of these catalog, you will wonder, even today, many of us and many archaeologists, they simply collect and dump them, and they are in the dead corner of in the department or in a museum, and nobody knows what has been collected and where from they have collected and so on and so forth. But whereas here, you have the best example of how you can redeem your responsibility as an archaeologist, as a prehistorian, and as a geologist as well. So Foote published 21 comprehensive geological reports. These are called memoirs and records of Geological Survey of India. They were published by the British GSI, and also Foote was also very up to date in terms of the developments that were taking place in Europe. And so he was familiar with these terms and terminologies that were being adopted in Europe in Paleolithic archaeology, and so he was using them. He was particularly aware of these. And so when he was excavating Vilasargam cave, he was looking for Upper Paleolithic, and Upper Paleolithic is in Europe was called Magdalenian, where they had found bone tools, blade tools, and so on and so forth. And so he found some such pieces here and then identified them as Magdalenian tools. And that is how later, post-independence period, archaeologists went back to these caves in search of these Upper Paleolithic and so on and so forth. So these particular volumes undoubtedly represent a prime example of Foote's commitment to unraveling India's geological and archaeological resources. And that is from where many branches of the tin fields of geology and archaeology emanated. And so at the end of 50 years of his service in the Geological Survey of India, he was honored by the colleagues, and then while he presented this to the Geological Survey in Madras, the geologists of the GSI presented him this hammer. This is even today a prize collection of his descendants in England, and they have given us this photograph. And these are the first tools that he identified at Pallavaram and so on. So these publications and the area that he covered, this is largely the Madras province, and these are principalities which were not directly under the British. You have Mysore Principality, you have Sendur Principality, you have Padukottai, you have Travancore, and so on, and several of these. Although these boundaries existed, when it came to Foote's survey work, these boundaries did not come in the way. So he surveyed major part of this area, including Ganjam in Orissa to major part of present-day Andhra Pradesh and parts of Telangana. And then he also surveyed southern part of this particular province, coastal regions, and then major part of Tamil Nadu, and identified large number of archaeological sites of various time periods and so on. So these are the districts that he had covered while he was working in British India. And then later, the subdivisions, renaming and everything has taken place. We are given here the modern names of the early districts and so on. And as I said, 1870 marks, an important year for us in Karnataka, because that was the time he came to, Bellary, and prior to coming, he had developed this particular paper, which was published in the Madras Records of Geological Survey of India. And then he came to Madras, North Arcot districts. He carried out the geological investigations and prepared maps of geological formations, which have now been identified as Gondwana formations and tertiary formations and so on. They are not simply restricted to this coastal Tamil Nadu, but the northwards into this area, into Nellore and then Visakhapatnam area. He identified several of these geological formations, which are younger than the major geological formations in this area, which are Archean, greenstone, and granite formations, and so on. And then this particular book, Geology of Southern Maratha Country, is equally important. And this is where he identified two distinctive geological basins which came to be known, which were identified as Kaladgi and Bhima basins. Kaladgi, at the time when Foote was surveying, or during the British time, Kaladgi was a district headquarters. That used to be their base camp, and from there they would survey. And then he identified a distinctive series of rocks which he called Kaladgi series. These are different from rocks that are commonly seen in the Madras Presidency, across Madras Presidency, and these are called Kaladgi quartzite, sandstones, limestones, and so on. And these are the rocks which were extensively utilized by early man for making Paleolithic artifacts, whether lower, middle, upper Paleolithic, and so on. And that is where he identified a series of sites along the river Ghataprabha and Malaprabha, which I will gradually show you. And then in 1878, he discovered this upper Gondwanas in Trichinopoli and Nellore districts and so on. I need not go into the details of these geological tours, but then each of these were giving rise to identification of prehistoric sites. And that is why these records are very, very important. Apart from his 2 volumes published by the Madras Government Museum, these reports also help us understand the context in which his Paleolithic, Neolithic, Mesolithic sites have been found and so on. So these are some of the area covered by Robert Bruce Foote. In addition to that, he went into Gujarat, that is Gaikwad province, and also went into Madhya Pradesh, Narmada Valley, Jabalpur area, and so on. And wherever he went, he did not miss, identifying the presence of an artifact, or what we call a stone tool, and so on. But prior to his going, into the central Indian region, there were some, geologists who had identified flake tools and stone flakes and so on, but they were not sure what they are. So that is why we call these pre-identification days. But with the coming of Robert Brucewood, it ushered in a new era of Indian prehistory and so on. So Telangana, Andhra Pradesh, and Karnataka, and lot of his archaeological discoveries in these three districts: Kurnool, Anantapur, Bellary. And then in addition to that, he had surveyed this part as well. And then modern research has certainly contributed to better understanding and so on. So here you can see, some of these publications of his findings have been published here. 1884, he excavated Bilasargam, and then he also twice he excavated 1884, 85 A and B and so on. And that is where he identified the presence of Upper Paleolithic in India comparable to those in Europe and so on. So looking at these different regions of modern Karnataka, and Food's contribution in terms of his surveys and documentation and also publication, that is very, very important here. So the geology of southern Maratha country is sort of a Bible for most of us who survey the Ghataprabha and Malaprabha valleys, and it has served a great deal of purpose by guiding modern day prehistoric research in this area. And in his research in this area largely refers to what we call Neolithic and post-Neolithic archaeology. He went up to Hyderabad, although it was under the dominion of Nizam of Hyderabad, but he also, in and around or in the vicinity of Hyderabad, he also documented the presence of Neolithic and so on. But he did not, himself excavate any of these sites, but for making a very, very systematic and accurate documentation, including measurement of the size of the mounds. You have to believe me, that much pains he took to make sure that his description becomes more and more authentic and so on. So this is the geological region which was covered by Robert Brucewood for extensive survey and mapping. And you see different patterns here. All these different colors represent different geological formations, which I will not go in detail. But the larger area is covered by the granitic area, where we have abundant occurrence of Neolithic and Iron Age and early historic sites. And some of these green and red, these are the bands where we have these schist belts. They are called schist belts. Now they are called greenstone belts. And Food had systematically mapped all of them, and they were all gold-bearing schist belts. And the Kolar ones, Hatti ones, and then there are some minor ones in Gulbarga area, Mangaluru, and then you have the Chitradurga schist belt and so on. All of them are very, very productive for copper, gold, and several other minerals and rocks and so on. So mineral rock resources were first identified by him, and in all these areas. And then incidentally, he also found wherever quartzite rock was found exposed, he immediately point to look for, because he was sure by then that quartzite rock was the most dominant, most popular stone from which these early Paleolithic, middle Paleolithic tools were made. And he was very, very successful in doing so. So his maps were a great deal of, provided great deal of details regarding mineral and metal resources. And that is where mining activity has been very, very prosperous and very productive in all these areas. And this particular belts that we see are today well known by the names of Sendur greenstone belts. It is schist belts. These are copper, gold and silver and manganese, iron ore, dolomites, and so on. They all occur here. In addition to that, there are certain formations called Baba Budan formations, and they contain quartzites, and that was the source of raw material for making paleoliths. So he did find, there are some areas where he found dense occurrence of Paleolithic sites, some areas very, very sparse occurrence, in some areas no sites of the Paleolithic at all. So he said very clearly that some of these geological provinces did not attract early human expansion into those areas, and they were isolated and so on and so forth. So this is being critically looked at. Newer surveys have been carried out, and then there is some evidence that they were not areas of attraction, no doubt, but then they were areas of relative attraction when people moved into these areas, into the basaltic area, into granitic area, into the schist belts across, and so on and so forth. And so his idea that wherever quartzites are there, you have these Paleolithic sites and so on. So you look at this detailed map, which is updated by the modern day geological research, which is carried out by the Geological Survey as well as the Mysore Geological Department. In all these areas, you come across some of the numbers here. Only numbers are restricted to this area, and we don't see any of the numbers here. So these numbers indicate the Paleolithic sites that were known from this area. So that gives us an idea that there are some areas where, which were not areas of attraction during the Paleolithic. Whereas in this area, you find abundant occurrence of Neolithic and megalithic sites and so on. So these maps were, the initial maps were prepared by Robert Brucefoot, later on, upgraded by modern day surveys, with the help of modern technology. You have remote sensing technology, you have advanced, what you call EDM, DEM, digital elevation models and so on. And so that helps in identifying the geological features. See, even again, you see there is a cluster of sites associated along the periphery of this particular region. So these are all sites, and these sites are associated with the quartzitic exposures in that area. So this was another region which copper mines were famous in the Chitradurga region, and this belt extends from Gadag in northern Karnataka to almost up to Mysore, in southern Karnataka. And then in the Western Ghats in this area, and then you have further east into the plains of the Mysore Plateau, you have these sites, and they are all associated with the presence of early Paleolithic sites and so on. And this is the famous Sandur greenstone belt, which is very, very productive. It's very infamous as well for the mining activity that has been going on. And even here we have, you don't see, dense occurrence of these sites, but then yet they are there, and their presence is incidentally in the areas where we have quartzite exposures and so on. So this is the residence of Robert Brucefoot when he first came to Bellary in 1870, and that was the time he was residing in this particular bungalow. Is on the banks of the large tank here, which was built during the colonial period. And then this lake carries a lot of water throughout the year, sort of a perennial river. It's a wonderful landscape. And so this was the bungalow where he lived for a few months. That was the time his fourth daughter was born to the first wife. Unfortunately, his wife fell sick. They returned to Madras, and then he came back several years later. But this was the beginning, and this was the time when he identified both Kudithini ash mound as a typical Neolithic burnt cattle dung mound, and also the Sanganakalu site where he found the presence of Neolithic remains and so on and so forth. And that is where the era of identification of archaeological sites begins in this particular part of southern India. A close-up view of this particular ash mound, you see this hard crusty-like material, which is vitrification of the burnt cow dung at very high temperatures. And then because of recent rains, there has been this kind of grass growth. And this particular mound was being subject to, destruction by the highway expansion. Fortunately, we were alerted, and then we started a movement a couple of years ago, and that finally resulted in realigning the, highway. And then we have been, supported by the Bellary Thermal Power Station with a grant of 50 lakh of rupees to protect this area and develop this into a tourist or weekend destination for people in Bellary and Hospet and Tornagal and so on. And then we are going to name this as Mackenzie Point, because he was the first person to identify this. And then we'll have several other spots on this which will be named after the pioneers who came and looked at this and made observations and so on. So this is the road, the earlier road, but then this road is now being further shifted northwards, and then this is the greenstone belt which extends beyond this region into Sandur and Chitradurga and so on. And this is the profile of the ash mound, and you have a close-up of this ash mound, that vitrified layers, hard crust that you can see here. And because of this particular feature, this mound is able to stand for several thousand years and so on. This is the late B. Subbarao, who was a very successful successor to Robert Brucefoot. He retraced Robert Brucefoot's footsteps in Bellary region and then produced remarkable work with respect to understanding Neolithic and so on. And this young girl is Sushila by name, daughter of Raymond Alchin, who was also the last British Indologist who worked on some of these ash mounds. See, the idea, ethnographic parallels drawn by Robert Brucefoot inspired Raymond Alchin, and then he excavated another ash mound in the Tungabhadra Valley in Mahbubnagar district at a place called Uttanur, and then carried out detailed ethno-archaeological study, and then came out with the ritual practices, cultural practices, traditions prevailing among pastoral communities and extending backwards in time to the Neolithic and so on and so forth. So another view of this road, this is the old road. Now all this has been realigned, and we are very fortunate that this will be preserved for posterity for long time to come, in the future. And so it is not only the Bellary thermal power station which is supporting this development. The government of Karnataka also has sanctioned a couple of crores of rupees in the last budget, and that is being utilized for making this an important archaeological site anywhere in India, because this is the only ash mound which has survived across large number of ash mounds which were known in different parts of this particular region. So this boundary marks the distribution of the ash mounds, and these ash mounds are also in close part and integrated with the Neolithic sites. Some of the ash mounds are isolated, some are very close to the village settlements and so on. But there are different categories of ash mounds, and some of these which are named here have been investigated by different archaeologists at different points of time during the last 150 to 60 years or so. So that is one aspect of Robert Brucefoot's early phase of work here. And then in 1876, when he published that the geology of southern Maratha country, he had surveyed the Kaladgi basin and surveyed this systematic survey of the Ghataprabha and Malaprabha rivers, which cut through this Kaladgi basin. It's a geological basin. He found numerous sites, Paleolithic occurrences. He was very familiar with early Paleolithic, not so much with the middle and upper Paleolithic and so on. So he is documented the occurrence of this kind of tools at a number of sites along this river Malaprabha. And later on, R.V. Joshi from Deccan College, who was the first head of Department of Geology at Karnataka University, later became a geologist in the Archaeological Survey of India, a prehistorian in Deccan College, and then he initiated retracing the footsteps of Robert Brucefoot, and not only found rediscovered the sites mentioned by him, but added many more sites. And in the last 50 years, systematic surveys have been going on, and 3 or 4 generations of archaeologists have worked here. As a result, we know such dense occurrence of these Paleolithic sites. And at each of these sites, you come across variety of these kind of tools, hand axes, cleavers, and so on and so forth. Similar situation is also reflected in Ghataprabha basin. It's not only along the rivers, but away from the rivers. This was the most interesting aspect of recent research in this area. And that is where that only the riverine archaeological sites are not the ones which are very, very potential. There are inland sites, and they need to be looked at much more carefully in order to understand human adaptations to these rocky landscapes and so on. Ghataprabha and Malaprabha are the 2 important rivers which are tributaries of the Krishna River, and they drain this region. They have their source in the Western Ghats, and what you need to observe is there are no sites here. And as you come down the eastern slopes of the Western Ghats, you begin to get sites here and there, but then the density increases as you move towards the lower reaches, because this is the confluence of the river with the Krishna River and so on. So this is type of typical quartzitic hand axes and cleaver artifacts which have been found in abundance, and different scholars at different points of time have gone back into these areas, and then they have come out with newer and newer insights into the understanding of man-land relationships, so on and so on. So while he was serving the Maharaja of Mysore, he traversed across the southern part of Mysore, present-day Karnataka, in the Mysore plateau area, and then particularly the upper reaches of the Tunga and the Bhadra. So this is the Tunga River and Bhadra River in the Western Ghats here, the source in the Gangamula region here, and between this region is also known as Mulnad borderlands. So as early as 1896, before relinquishing his position as director of Mysore Geological Department, he identified the site of Lingadahalli, where he discovered sites which artifacts which I showed you previously and so on. So until recently, this area was not subject to resurvey. One of my friends and colleagues in the Kuvempu University, Rajaram Hegde, he was also very curious, and he was aware of the region's potentiality. He was occasionally surveying, and once he involved me, and then we jointly surveyed this area and found many more sites in the region of the present-day campus of the Kuvempu University, and then further, westwards into the Western Ghats and so on. We have currently prepared a detailed paper on this, and it will be published very soon. So, in addition to this, food survey also prompted other geologists who were working in Bangalore area. The Central College Geology Department, there was one Dr. Sampath Iyengar, and he was the one who surveyed some parts of Tumkur area, where there is an extension of this Chitradurga schist belt, and then there were these exposures of quartzite, and then came across the site of what we call Kibbanahalli. And then this collection was made in 1920s or so. He made a brief description of them, and then later Bridget Ulchin came, and then she looked at it, and then she gave published a note in the journal called Current Science way back in 1952 or so. But recently, Akash Srinivas, while he was doing his post-graduation at Deccan College, he also carried out a detailed survey. And prior to this, Dr. Sivataraka did extensive retracing of the sites which were mentioned by Sampath Iyengar, and then added many more sites and so on. And so this area, which was otherwise not known for Paleolithic settlements, has now been well documented by the presence of these sites, not only in the Tumkur region, but northwards into Chitradurga and Bellary region and so on. But they are certainly associated with quartzitic exposures and so on. So this map was prepared by Dr. Sheshadri. And of course, his focus was the prehistoric past in general. It was a thesis submitted to University of London at School of Oriental and African Studies, and then he revisited many of these sites, and then he brought out a very commendable PhD work and a very scholarly analysis of the findings that were made by Food, and of course the other geologists who served part of the southern part of Karnataka. And this is the quartzitic rock which has been used for making variety of these hand axes and cleavers and so on, and they are found all over this area. In a number of these sites which are mentioned here or also mentioned here, they do contain artifacts of this type, and they are all Paleolithic artifacts and so on, lower Paleolithic and so on. So what we can, from this particular account, what we have to plan for the future of Indian prehistory and so on. And these points have bothered many of our earlier generation archaeologists, particularly Professor H.D. Sanklia of Deccan College. And he was the one who was a thorough student of Robert Brusford, and he had read in detail the two catalogs published by the Madras Government Museum and made notes. And then he was identifying his students to go back and retrace footsteps of Robert Brusford, and then come out with the dissertations, and then obtain their PhDs and so on. And Foote had, because of his geological knowledge, he used to very, very graphically describe the geological context of these, Paleolithic sites. And that is where it became easy for many later prehistorians to learn geology and then try to, emulate Robert Brusford in describing their findings and the context, geological and geomorphic context and so on. So similar contexts have come to be recognized, and considerable attention has been given to understand their age, genesis, evolution, and then climatic background and so on. His first paper, which was published in the Madras Journal of Literature and Science, gave us a very clear picture of the contemporary environment. Ferricrete is a kind of geological formation which comes into existence, which comes into existence because of hot and humid conditions and so on. And then Foote's work at Pallavaram and Athirampakkam focused on fixing the stratigraphic context and their age and contemporary climatic conditions. And now we know the age of this particular site is 1.5 million years or so. Based on his extensive traverses across diverse geological and ecological provinces in southern India, he proposed that Paleolithic sites are found associated with quartzite formation. So that is where he found one-to-one relationship, correlation between quartzite and Paleolithic sites. And then he said dense forest ecosystems were not areas of attraction, which is also now partially correct and partially incorrect as well, because we are finding two sites, but scattered sites, dispersed sites in the Western Ghats, dense forest areas, rainforest areas, and so on. So came to be serious. Some of these issues were taken up very seriously by later workers, and the new understanding has been obtained. So as I mentioned, Sankhya was the one who wanted to test Foote's hypothesis that basaltic area was an isolated area. The rock basalt is a volcanic rock which occurs in Belgaum, Bijapur, Gulbarga, and further north into Maharashtra and Gujarat and so on, is not a suitable rock for making stone Paleolithic artifacts, and so you cannot expect the presence of Paleolithic sites. That was a categorical statement made by Robert Brucewood. But Sankhya was very keen of testing this hypothesis. And so he tested this hypothesis and disproved Robert Brucewood by discovering sites in the Godavari, Upper Godavari Valley. And he was the first person to identify not only Lower Paleolithic, but also Middle Paleolithic. And the first paper that was published in an international journal of high impact factor, Science, was published by him because he discovered Middle Paleolithic sites in the Pravara River Valley. And later, the similar sites were also found in the Kaladgi Basin and so on. And then he also found there were clues from Robert Brucewood's work in the Ghataprabha, where he had found a lot of animal fossils. And he looked for similar fossil record in the upland Maharashtra region, and then came out with these discoveries of animal fossils and so on. And in 1974, he produced a comprehensive volume based on his work and then many of his PhD students' work, and produced this prehistory and protohistory of India and Pakistan, which was published in 1974 and so on. So later on, he led many of these people into this field, and each one of them have contributed a great deal and provided new insights, and then application of modern methods, especially dating methods. Chronology of the Paleolithic has been a very big issue and so on. So I was talking about this Kaladgi Basin. This is the region where you have quartzite, sandstone, limestone, and so on. And this was the place where the base camp existed, and Foote worked from here and prepared this geological map. And now we have these rivers, Ghataprabha, Malaprabha, where a number of these sites have been found. And this is the rock exposure of quartzite rock outcrops, which was utilized by these people for making Paleolithic tools, and the kind of landscape that you see. Now it all looks very dry, though the vegetation is not dense. As you go back in time, this was much more densely vegetated, and then there were many of these water holes. The high water tables provided for surface occurrence of water. Perennial water bodies existed, and that is where you have hundreds of these Paleolithic sites. And we excavated some of them and found these sites in the Kaladgi Basin. And we tried to also understand the way Foote tried to understand Pallavaram and Athirampakkam and so on. And we found that this is a rocky landscape, very dry, rocky, desertic conditions prevail here in the Badami region. But we still find, each and every second piece of stone is a stone artifact, man-made stone tool and so on. So we wanted to understand the paleo landscape, the paleo environment in this area. We found that there were large number of springs which have now dried up. And there were these geological features which gave us clear clues about the existence of perennial spring activity in this area. And that is where this landscape was much more hospitable to hunter-gatherer Paleolithic communities, even in the past millions of years ago. And then further northwards, beyond Kaladgi Basin, is the Bhima Basin, and that is where he had found one site way back in 1876 at a place called Yedihalli. But later work by Padaya in this region for his PhD dissertation resulted in the discovery of Neolithic and megalithic ash mound sites and so on. And he nearly concluded that there is no Acheulean or Lower Paleolithic in this area. But in 1974-75, when he went back into the Hunsgi Valley, there was a PWD trench which had thrown up lot of these Paleolithic tools made from limestone and so on. This is a kind of an echelon type of Bhima Basin in Yadgir district, and then it enters into Andhra Pradesh, into Osmanabad and other areas. And in an area of 500 square kilometers, he found nearly 400 Paleolithic sites. You can imagine how dense occurrence it is. And then you can imagine that potential of this area. If further surveys are carried out in different parts of this particular basin, we are sure that there is even more denser occurrence of these Paleolithic sites and so on. But again, interesting to see is this is the basaltic area, and this is the granitic area, and this is the limestone area. The trijunction, geological trijunction, but the tools are made and sites are associated only with this particular formation and so on. So there is that geological, context in which these early human occupation and adaptations took place. So as I mentioned, this is the limestone plateau here. Lot of groundwater spring activity keeps this. The Gulbarga region is known for very hot and desertic conditions, but you go any time of the year, including the height of the summers, you see this much of greenery there. This is because of spring activity even today. And that is why, because of this perennial spring activity, the PW wanted to construct a barrage, to create a lake there. And while they were digging foundation wall for the foundation, the artifacts came to the surface. And that is where, subsequent to 1974, Padaya carried out detailed and systematic, field work, and then documented hundreds of them. So 200 lower Paleolithic and equal number of middle Paleolithic, and of course Neolithic and post-Neolithic sites are known here. And he excavated one site called Isampur. I mentioned 1.5 million years for the Atirampakam site. Here, the date for this Acheulean lower Paleolithic site goes back to 1.2 million years or so. And the way in which limestone blocks were detached by these, Paleolithic hominins, blocks of limestone were detached, and then the pyramidal flakes were removed, and each of these large flakes were modified into hand axes, cleavers, and so on and so forth. And then, following this phase of Paleolithic research, we now enter into the Neolithic of the Maidan region. See, we were looking at some of these terrains, very different, terrains which are great relief and undulating terrain and so on. But once you move into this central part of the peninsula, you are in the plains, open plains and so on. So his survey in the Rayalaseema region, 1870 onwards till 1894, he produced, geological reports for Bellary, Raichur, not Bellary, Anantapur, Kurnool, Kadapa, and Chittoor and so on. And while during the course of his preparation of these reports, he found large number of Neolithic and megalithic sites. And then subsequently, all these people, retraced his footsteps and then excavated large number of these sites. And then we know so much about Neolithic and Iron Age of this area and transition to early historic period and so on. So I did not go into detail because it will take a lot of time, but I'll just introduce this particular site, a granitic Tor Inselberg landscape. These are Inselbergs surrounded by flat erosional plains and so on. Most of these early village settlements were located on the plateau of these hills, and more than 1,000 acres of land is covered by this particular site at Sanganakallu, earlier known as Kappagallu, Kuppagallu, and so on. And then now it is being renamed, and in modern literature you will find reference to this site complex as Sanganakallu Neolithic Megalithic Site Complex and so on. So we were investigating, this site in the 1990s. When we landed there, we see this kind of destruction taking place, and that is where we thought we should open up another area of archaeological discipline known as public outreach archaeology and so on, in order to facilitate, the preservation of and protection of these sites, the largest Neolithic site anywhere in southern India for that matter. And then, if the magnitude of mining activity that was taking place would have certainly erased this particular, hills to the plain ground and so on. So we moved, across various sections of the society in the Bellary area. Finally, we were able to, impress upon the district administration, which, supported us and then finally helped us in stopping this mining activity. And we carried out detailed study of this particular site. This is one of the largest, the 5 large hills, in the area. This is the area which was first visited by Robert Brucefoot in 1870. And that point of time, he only visited the southern part of this hill, and he came back in 1880s while he was preparing the geological report of the Bellary region. So he revisited and then found that this was a stone axe manufacturing site of the Neolithic period. But now we know that this stone axe manufacturing activity is much later in time, is typical of the early Iron Age in this area, although it is Neolithic, but the large-scale manufacturing activity began around 1400 BC or so. So this site preserves evidence of house floors, post holes, hearths, and so on. You have rock art, you have paintings, and then you have what we call bedrock mortars, where processing of grains was carried out, and polishing of the stone axes was also done. And the landscape also preserves these megaliths, Iron Age megaliths or late Neolithic burial monuments that we come across in this particular landscape. And our detailed study and investigation into the site yielded evidence of these precious, semi-precious stones which were made, procured from the Sandur schist belt, and that is where Robert Brucefoot, during his second visit to Sanganakalu site in the 1880s, he added a chapter called Economic Geology, and that is how sources of these raw materials and also metals were located, and the way in which these resources were procured by the Neolithic folk, and later people, and lapidary was established, metallurgical activity was done, and coppersmithy was also carried out, and so on. So that particular chapter is an eye-opener to many of us, because as early as 1870s he had this idea of economic prehistory and so on. And then the pottery and then stone tools abundant. We also have copper in the Sandur schist belt. You have, even today, there are old copper workings, especially 5 kilometers east of Bellary. We have a village called Halakundi, and in the neighborhood of Halakundi we have ancient copper workings, and the site is called Sugalamma Devi Gudda, and that is where Foote and even earlier Mackenzie had also found ash mounds and so on. And then this typical black and red ware appears around 1400 BC. This is an Iron Age pottery and an advanced technology, and reflects upon large scale manufacturing activity, intensity of production, and so on. So ash mounds are not only found in isolated areas, they are part of the hill slopes, they are part of the plateau area. And then Foote, when he came in 1870, he found 3 at the base. And later on, subsequently, we have added 4 more, which are buried in the landscape here, and they have been exposed. So the Neolithic and the megalithic folk, they dug pits into this particular rock called dolerite, and that was the blocks of this dolerite were subject to flaking. The byproducts of flaking is dumped here, several meters, sometimes meter, 1.5 meter thick flake debitage, sitting on the plateau here. And then these grooves where the edges of these stone axes were, sharpened and so on, and grinding was also carried out to smoothen the surface of these artifacts and so on. So you have all these features well preserved in different parts of the landscape. So it was necessary for us that only 10% of the site has been studied so far. What about the rest? So next generation archaeologists have to be taking up this work, and then for that we need to preserve the site and so on. So some of these boulders, these are the areas where microlithic tools were manufactured at Sanganakalu. So we went back. Robert B. Subbarau's work was the pioneering work in Sanganakalu area. That was the time when Mortimer Wheeler was excavating Brahmagiri, and he followed the similar culture history model and then reconstructed the development of village settlement from Neolithic to later time period and so on. And even here we found a buried ash mound, which was not exposed during earlier excavations because they were very restricted trenches. But here we expanded these trenches to wider area on top of the hill and found that the ash mound extends over a vast area. So this is the way we develop our understanding of the prehistoric settlements. And that is where it is necessary that we go back again and so on. So this circular feature that you see is not the only one we see. There are series of them on the plateau here, and each of these was a stone axe manufacturing workshop. And then you can see that the waste products lying here, and underneath you have an ash mound here. So these are blocks of granite with grooves and cupules where the stone axes were finished. Edges were ground, and then the butt end was rounded and so on. And you see here one of the circular feature was excavated, and it contained large number of these artifacts in different stages of manufacture. And then we also found that these circular features were also partly a residential area. So you get nearly lakhs of pieces of waste products of making stone axes and so on. And you can see these blocks of granite with deep grooves and so on, reflecting on the intensity of Neolithic stone manufacturing activity. It was generally thought that this was Neolithic period, but we have been able to establish a chronology with the help of modern dating techniques, especially atomic absorption, radiocarbon dating method. And so we know that this early Iron Age witnessed large-scale surplus, was being generated in terms of black and red ware, in terms of stone arts manufacturing activity, in terms of lapidary, where varieties of beads were manufactured, and so trade network began to establish. So we have now been able to document the processes towards urbanization, beginning as early as 1400 BC. And by the time Mauryans came, and these were the people who were very well off economically, because they had full control of the resources in this area. And so the blocks of, dolerite, initial chipping, and then the rough out, and then you have a rough triangular form, initial grinding, continuous grinding, intensity of grinding finally gives rise to very finely made polished stone axe and so on. I'll not go into details. These are some of the mortars on the bedrock on top of the hill and elsewhere. And we have these, querns or mortars where grinding of the surface of the stone axe was taking place. And some of them are also meant for processing grains and so on. So these are grooves where edges were, sharpened. And then some of them are portable ones. So we come to that point where, where this public outreach archaeology could be very, very productive. So as I said in the beginning, this mining activity could be halted forever. And then this also contributed to establishing a museum in Bellary city, and also at the site itself. At the site, the museum is yet to develop, whereas the readily available buildings were handed over to me by the Deputy Commissioner of Bellary. And very recently, this museum was declared open. It is located in the cultural complex, Kannada Culture Department, as a series of buildings, art gallery, open air theaters, central library, auditoria, so many things are there. In addition, there was another building which was given to us to start a museum. So recently, these developments have taken place. This pathway leads to the museum there. And then we have this entrance to the museum. During the last 6 months, what we did, the rock art that is, abundantly seen in the hills of Sanganakalu, and there were these, and this rock art was generally found on dolerite rock, and we had at the base of the hill huge, boulders of dolerite, which did not carry any, rock art feature. So we decided that we lift them from the site to the museum complex. So we have created an archaeological landscape, and these boulders were transported from the site to the museum complex here, and then we have replicated the rock art. See, the commonly seen imagery in the rock art of Sanganakalu or Neolithic period is the bull imagery, but in addition to that, you have other animals like peacock, antelopes, and so on. And then we have interlocked bulls and so on, and this leads into the inside the museum complex. These are interlocked bulls. We're trying to understand the meaning of this, but we know bull occupies a very special place amongst these early agro-pastoral communities, and the bull was performing several functions, not one. And that is one reason I think the complex, interlocked bulls are prominently seen. It was a ritual animal. This was a ritual animal. It's a fertility deity. It was a beast of burden. It helped in increasing the progeny of the cattle populations, and then the secondary products coming from cattle and so on. So there is some meaning, attached to this, but we're trying to understand to what extent we are correct in our, understanding of this kind of complex rock art features, imageries in that area. So here, the close-up of these boulders with these imageries and so on, and suddenly, why this map? So this is the map of Mauryan Empire, but more importantly, the map of distribution of various categories of the oldest written records in the Indian subcontinent. So there are different categories. There are, you have these pillar edicts, you have major rock edicts, minor rock edicts, and special edicts, and so on. But one can, when you look at this particular zone, this is the area where we have the Neolithic site complexes across this, Maidan region of Karnataka. So Maski, Sannati, Nitturu, Udegolam, and all of them. This particular situation and the presence of these edicts clearly bring an end to the prehistoric past of this area. The beginning of literacy, the introduction of a written language, and then the lithic record in the form of these edicts are seen here. So our museum scope begins from the earliest phase of mankind to the end of prehistoric period, and that is where we have these oldest records. And in and around Bellary we have these this cluster of minor rock edicts of Ashoka. So that is one reason I thought people, this is the premises in the courtyard in front of the museum building. We have developed this garden, and then we have a pavilion where the Deputy Commissioner again helped us to bring a huge granitic boulder, and on this boulder we have replicated, not complete edicts of Ashoka, but in order to let people know, whoever visit the campus, and then this open space is utilized by students from nearby colleges. During the day you see a lot of them underneath the tree, and then I wanted to arouse curiosity in them about these features. So we created this particular thing, and so a close-up of replicated Shashana, the Nitturu Ashoka Shashana, a minor rock edict, and the Department of History and Archaeology has a role in identifying this particular edict at Nitturu, and in the neighborhood of Nitturu there is another site called Udegolam. These are both minor rock edicts. They were known to many people, geologists in particular, but they didn't know what it was. So it was pre-identification phase. But once Karnataka University History Department entered, it was definite that this belongs to the Mauryan king Ashoka, and this inscription also refers to his name and Devanampiya, together. And as you enter, we have created a model, scaled down model of the entire complex of the Neolithic Sanganakalu site. This is visible from the top, from this gallery here. But then in the ground floor, we have, the story of human biocultural evolution. And at the point where transition from hunting gathering to agro-pastoral way of life begins. And as we move upwards, we enter into the Neolithic phase of this particular region. And then we have this upper floor completely dedicated to V. Subbarao, the pioneer at Sanganakalu, and all the antiquities from the Neolithic context at Sanganakalu and related sites in this area are on display, and they are also systematically catalogued. Like we are trying to emulate Robert Brucefoot in producing catalogs, and that work is still going on. In the last 2 years, we have done extensive digital cataloging, and still it is going on. And finally, we will have a very modern catalog of all antiquities that I have collected during the course of my archaeological career in Deccan College, in Karnataka University, and even today I have been working and so collecting a lot of antiquities and so on. Some of these dioramas, and then the information that we provide about Stone Age of Stone Age sites in Africa, because the oldest ones are located in Africa. And similarly, there are several of these dioramas. Another view of the hills of Sanganakalu. This is where Subbarao had excavated, and we carried out our excavation here. We have laser lights, which when switched on, you can see the color variation here. The rock art sites, megalithic sites, workshop sites, ash mound sites, and so on. And then, as I said, we are doing a digitization of all the artifacts. I have a collaboration with Japanese archaeologists. They come here to help us, and each and every piece of artifact that we have are being digitized with the help of modern day digital scanners. And this work will take quite some time. But we are at it work, and we have created these cabinets for storing artifacts. And all this has been very, very generously supported by the district administration. Several lakhs of rupees have been spent on this, and we are sure we are setting a model museum to educate the local people. This museum is created to educate the local people about their heritage and make sure that the school teachers are given proper training in identifying archaeological sites in the areas where the schools are located, and it has also been very, very productive. And so that is why I believe in this particular adage that a stitch in time saves 9, is fully realized in the context of all the efforts that are going on at the museum and so on. Thank you for your patience. Yeah.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much, sir. I thank you, sir, for this comprehensive and very relevant contributions of Robert Bruce Foote. As Professor Ashok Shettar sir has mentioned in the comments, thanks for interesting details not only of Robert Bruce Foote's professional but also personal and family life. Truly naturalized Indian. Hard to imagine what could have been the course of Indian prehistorical studies in the absence of Western scientific methods brought to the field by Foote and others. So once again, sir, thank you on behalf of all our viewers and all the members of Team Akshara Foundation. Now there will be a brief question and answer session. If any of our viewers have any questions, kindly put it in the comment section. We will Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't see any in the chat box. Maybe you have access to it.
Yes, sir. I have noted down 1 or 2 questions that had come so far. Ms. Nidhi Katti has asked, sir, how to identify an ash mound? Are there any unique characteristics of ash mounds of South India?
Yes, certainly it is easy to identify, but you need to do some field work and look at the ash mound in the field context. And then you will see the description of these ash mounds in a lot of publications. And that will help you because, the ash, this deliberately accumulated cow dung set on fire at differential temperatures. It was not uniform throughout. And then, as I said, it is episodic burning. It was not one large amount of fat dung and then set on fire and so on. These were seasonal camps. And then, as I said, they are part and parcel of certain ritual, practices of these agro-pastoral communities. And then each time, the accumulated dung was set on fire, some part of it remained partially burnt, and some part of it was highly burnt. So the highly burnt horizons became vitrified, and those which were not highly burnt, they remained soft. So you have a strata of alternation of soft ash, vitrified ash, soft ash, vitrified ash, and sometimes even soil layers come in between. So they develop a mound, and they are abrupt. They are abrupt. They are part of the landscape. They are abrupt. And when you compare the neighboring, area, you will see that the neighboring area is different in terms of geology and then morphology. Whereas these mounds are convex, convex in shape. They occupy large areas, and then they are located at certain specific geographical points. So it will not be very difficult. If you see one ash mound, it will never be difficult for you to identify another one. So there are no pieces of ash mound displayed in the museums. That is one reason that you don't know what it is. But if you accompany us, if you are very keen on looking at knowing what it is, we'll be happy to introduce you to these ash mounds.
Thank you very much, sir, on behalf of Ms. Nidhi Katti. There is another question. It's not a question. Ashok Pujar has written, Malaprabha Ghataprabha Nadi Patradalli avaru kaigonda samshodhane bagge heli sir.
Mattumme helbeka. Nearly 450 sites have been discovered. Initially, he also discovered animal fossils. One animal fossil belongs to rhinoceros. He has also called it Rhinoceros deccanensis, and that is where he found. I described him as a paleontologist. Is the one. So he identified some of these fossil bones of rhino as well as cattle bones, fossilized teeth of cattle, Pleistocene, cattle have been found. And then, in addition to that, the deposits along the river exposures, he identified the presence of Paleolithic artifacts in the gravel bodies. And this he found both in the Malaprabha and Ghataprabha. The famous sites like Cad, Hiremullangi, in the Badami, Banashankari area, you find. Now, in addition to what Bennihalla is one site where he found hundreds of these Paleolithic sites. So both these rivers cut through this quartzitic region, and they have exposed the sections on either side. And these, at the base of these river sections, you have gravel bodies, but the gravel bodies contain artifacts. So even for that, if you want to know how to identify a Paleolithic site along a river valley, we have to do field work. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir, on behalf of Ashok Pujar. There are no more questions, but however, 2 or 3 of the viewers have requested that you have to share your slides with them so that it will be very helpful to them.
I cannot share for copyright reasons, and
Yes,
it is,
yes.
yeah.
So we request them to watch this webinar once again. Whenever they want any information, they can always come back to the lecture, as it will always be there on our Facebook page, and will be shortly even uploaded to our YouTube channel also. So you can always watch it there. If anyone has any other questions, kindly drop them in the comment section. So I would like to take this opportunity to just share the details of the webinar. Like, we had 368 registrants to the webinar, and they have come from various departments, not only of social sciences but also commerce and science. We have registrants from history, archaeology, anthropology, political science, culture, epigraphy, HRD, microbiology, computer sciences, physical education, geography, botany, management, linguistics, philosophy, earth sciences, agriculture, commerce, entomology, sociology, social work, and so on. And it is a very a wonderful experience, because we are overwhelmed with the response that we have got from the viewers all across India. We have participants from Karnataka, of course, and we also have participants from various our neighboring states, including Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Kerala, Goa. But we also have various participants coming from Orissa, Madhya Pradesh, Uttar Pradesh, West Bengal, Assam, Gujarat, Rajasthan, Delhi. And we also have 1 or 2 participants from Bangladesh. So,
they asked me also.
Yes, sir. So it was a very overwhelming experience for us. And as this is our very first webinar, it was really very wonderful that so many participants could join us today, and we could reach so many people in our very first endeavor. So there is a question. There are 2 more questions in the comment section. Sir, ಬೂದಿ ದಿನ್ನೆಗಳೆಲ್ಲವೂ ನವಶಿಲಾಯುಗಕ್ಕೆ ಸೇರಿರುತ್ತವೆಯೇ?
Yes, there is a lifespan of each of these ash mounds. We call it Neolithic of the ash mound tradition. Some of these ash mounds have a life span of about 100 years. Some of them have 200 years. Some have 250 years. Because during the course of our research at Sanganakalu, we developed a good chronological control on the life history of these mounds. And so smaller mounds are short-lived, maybe 50 years or so. And some are 100 years, as I said. Some, like Kudithini one, is likely to have the longest lifespan of 250 years or so. AMS radiocarbon dating has helped us. And now we are going to try even more sophisticated dating methods called OSL dating and IRSL dating method and so on. I'm looking for resources to collaborate with these geochronologists, and then we are likely to get even more refined high-resolution dates for the ash mounds. We have this particular phase of ash mound formation associated with the establishment of a village settlement. I said about a buried ash mound at Sanganakalu on top of Sannarachamma. It is associated prior to the village settlement coming up on top of the hill. These pastoral camps were coming up on tops of these hills. Another thing I did not explain was why these villages were located on tops of the hills. Nobody asked this question. It's because 5,000 years ago, water tables were very, very high, and there used to be numerous springs along the hill slopes, perennial source. We don't have a single river flowing in this region. All the sites are associated with interior landscapes and then hilltops and so on. How could they sustain without perennial source of water? Normally we look at these rivers, perennial rivers, as harboring the settlements and so on. But here we have an explanation why the settlements are situated on tops of these hills and so on. So groundwater tables were much higher. Spring activity was much more luxurious, and then it was all prosperous. At the base of the hills, there used to be depressions where water used to collect. So you have water holes, perennial water holes, spring alongside the hill slopes, and then perennial water bodies at the base of the hills and so on. Water was not flowing in a drainage, in the form of channels and so on. It used to be a sheet flood. Now the landscape has been modified because of agriculture and so on. So this perennial source activity was source of water was one controlling factor, which established the permanent settlements in this particular landscape. Otherwise, it would not have been possible. Yeah.
Thank you, sir. This question was asked by Tipesh HM. Thank you on behalf of him. There is one more question from Siddharth Saha. What is the significance of ash mound in the Neolithic age? The significance.
Should I repeat all my lecture?
No.
Anyway, as I said, there are so many theories about the processes, cultural processes responsible for the formation of that. As I said, the significance is it is associated with a ritual activity, in relation to the formation of a village settlement at a particular locale on the landscape. That is the simplest conclusion we have drawn, but we need to verify our own understanding. But they have a ritual significance. Otherwise, they have not been of any cultural use to the community which was responsible for their formation.
Last question. Thank you, sir.
Yeah.
There are two last questions. I request the participants to not ask any more questions as we have almost reached the 2-hour mark. So we will take these two questions. Sir, can you identify any recent explorations or sites in North Karnataka?
Can I identify?
I think
in order to identify, I have to do field work. There are ongoing research projects carried out by students, PhD students, and so on. But unless they publish, we don't come to know. This is one drawback amongst our research scholars. They don't publish properly, and then they don't have outlets also. Even if they publish them in obscure journals. We don't have access to them. Nowadays, we depend more on internet resources. And all our researchers, we don't go to library, don't read textbooks and so on. We mostly go through the, Academia, Edu, ResearchGate, and then we know the authors. They also upload and then, share their publications with us and so on. So we are updated in that respect. But if, the small scale explorations which are going on, unless they are published, we can't. Yeah, I can't comment on this.
Yes. Thank you, sir. And we will take this last question. ಎಲ್ಲ ಪುರಾತತ್ವ ನೆಲೆಗಳನ್ನು ರಕ್ಷಿತ ಸ್ಮಾರಕಗಳಾಗಿ ಉಳಿಸಿಕೊಳ್ಳಲು ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲವೇ? ಸರ್ಕಾರ ಅಥವಾ ಪುರಾತತ್ವ ಇಲಾಖೆ ಜವಾಬ್ದಾರಿ ತೆಗೆದುಕೊಳ್ಳುವುದಿಲ್ಲವೇ, ಸರ್?
ಸಾಧ್ಯವಿಲ್ಲ. It is very, very difficult because the developmental activity consumes this landscape. That is why we struggle to protect the site of Kudathini ash mound and the Sanganakallu site. At least one major site and one major ash mound. There were hundreds of these, and amongst them only few survive, ash mound especially. So if one ash mound is preserved for posterity, lot of new insights can be gained by future research. It is possible. So as I said in the beginning, we have only understood 10% of Sanganakallu. So there is so much scope. You don't have to find new sites. Go back to the sites which are already known, and you have new methodologies, new techniques, and then new theories, and you can adapt, these methods and then go back into these already excavated sites. Nobody stops them. Yeah.
Thank you very much, sir. We have come to the end of the Q&A, and I would just like to thank all the participants. There are a lot of congratulatory messages and a lot of encouraging words in the comment section. It is my regret that I cannot go through each and every comment here. But I would like to make an announcement here. So today's webinar, as I am sure and as all our viewers will also agree, was a huge success, and next month we are planning to have another webinar like this. For this webinar, we will have Professor Pramod Gai sir as our resource person. And,
Wonderful. Our genetics.
Yes,
Wonderful.
yes, sir. The webinar will be on the topic of recent trends in genetic archaeology, which is another very interesting and intriguing topic. So I request all our viewers to stay associated with us, and you keep following us so that you will get the notification of all our future endeavors. And it was a wonderful webinar so far. I also want to mention that the link to the feedback form will be put in the comment section of this video, and you can take it from there. Those who will fill the feedback form, certificates will be sent to them. I also request the viewers to cooperate with us. We will send the certificates within the next 2 days. It will not be possible to send certificates to all the viewers today itself. So kindly bear with us for that. I now request, as we have come to the end of the webinar, I now request Dr. Viraktamat sir to propose the vote of thanks.
Whether Kallolikar came or not?
Sir, yes.
He joined?
Pardon me. Actually, Professor Kallolikar sir has given a message. Due to some technical issues, he was not able to join the webinar today. He tried, but since he is traveling, the network was not consistent, and so he couldn't be present with us throughout the webinar. He has congratulated the organizers and the resource person and the chief guest for organizing this successful webinar, and he has also congratulated all the viewers for having obtained the benefits of this webinar. I thank him also. So now I request Dr. Viraktamat sir again to propose a vote of thanks.
A very good evening to one and all. It has been an amazing experience for us as the host of this one-day webinar on the contribution of Robert Bruce to archaeological studies in Karnataka. I am assured that the same experience is shared by our viewers, that for this the credit goes to our resource person, Professor Ravi Kurishettar sir. I thank you, sir, on behalf of all members of Team Akshara Foundation and all our viewers for your very informative and resourceful lecturer, sir. And I also thank the chief guest of this webinar, Professor Pramod Gai sir, who spoke words to encouragement and congratulation in favor of our academic endeavors. Sir has been a great source of support for us. I also thank Professor Shivardra Kallolikar sir in his absence for being a pillar of our Akshara Foundation.
Hello.
And always guidance towards better and better results.
So I think it is not connecting. Can somebody else propose vote of thanks?
I also thank all the respected professors and lecturers.
Can you hear, madam? Mute agila, unmute agila.
Mute ಮಾಡ್ತೀನಿ sir.
Unmute him. Aditya,
Yes, I have muted him.
unmute you.
Okay. I also thank all the respected professors and lecturers from various states, universities and colleges who have shown active participants and enthusiasm in this webinar. I also thank all research scholars, students and curious minds who have joined this webinar and benefited from it. I thank one and all who have been instrumental in the success of this webinar. directly and indirectly, thank you once again on behalf of all members of Akshar Foundation. Hope our association with you all the continues to flourish.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. sir. So we have come to the end of this webinar. We will take leave from all our viewers, and we hope that the same association continues to flourish. Thank you once again. Adios. Bye. Thank you, sir.